So Halloween is a bit of a mess. Depending on your count, it has 10, 11, 12, 13 entries because there are so many different versions of Michael, different timelines, even just different film canons. It's quite a lot to get into. So here I'm just going to concentrate on the top entries, and I'm going to start with what I think is one of the weakest in terms of the top five. I know this is a big fan favorite, but at number five is Halloween 2, which technically continues the story from the first film, but if you are a hardcore fan, you know it has a very controversial retcon of a major character. Overall, it is a very good film onto itself, but it does change the tone of the first one. The first one is a much more Hitchcock kind of film with a very intense, moody, psychological atmosphere. This one is basically kind of a very derivative slasher. And it hurts because there were so many imitations of Halloween after the first film that it's kind of not holding up very well because there are now a lot of superior slashers that have been made since that time period. And even within that gap, there were probably stronger entries. But for what it is well done. It does continue the story very naturalistically. And there's a lot of key scenes which are very, very strong, where Michael basically is stalking Laurie at the hospital and things like that. But overall, it is pretty flashy and gory, and needlessly so. It does have a spectacular ending, but it is overall a kind of weaker version of the first film, unfortunately. Number four is H2O, which apparently is also very controversial. And again, does do a major retcon because technically Michael was supposed to be dead by Halloween 2, but they kept continuing with the story. But what I do like is we retain a lot of his key features. For instance, he can drive a car. He's very intelligent. And so the way he stalks Lori and follows her all the way to California made a whole lot of sense. And Lori, for most of the film, is very traumatized, and it feels very naturalistically that she is still in a very frightened state. And there are very good callbacks to the first film and a lot of classic horror films and a lot of funny moments where they nod that this is a film. It's a very meta entry, but it's never too annoying about the meta level. However, there are problems with the mask, and even though the lead performances are very strong, a lot of people don't like Josh Hartnett, or it feels very dated because it is very much a late 1990s film with these kinds of characters who are in a high school or college and they're being stalked by some kind of killer. It has not aged well in certain ways, but overall, it's very strong and has a very great epic battle at the end with Laurie and Michael. I wish it went on much longer, but for what it was very, very well done. At number three is another controversial entry, which is The Curse of Michael Myers. Now, I myself prefer the producer's cut. I think that's a little bit more cohesive and explains the Thorn cult more fully. However, I will admit that the producer's cut, even though I do think it's a little stronger, is a little slow. It's not as flashy as the theatrical version, which is also pretty good, but the theatrical version has a very bizarre ending, which is really strange and just has Michael emitting green goo for whatever reason. The producer's cut has a better story, but it is slower. It doesn't have the music that the theatrical cut does. And I can understand the music video style that the theatrical cut has, which is a much faster pace, and people prefer that. But for my money, the producer's cut is a lot better. It does tie up the story well enough, and it has Loomis in a final scene with a very strange dilemma on his hands, which I don't want to ruin, but it's very well done. And at number two is Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, which is, as the name says, really spells out everything. So Michael has been essentially injured and finally decides to revive himself. He returns to Hanfield. Loomis is chasing him, and he has a new target with Jamie. And it's just very, very well done on so many levels. The performances does change key aspects of the lore, introducing psychic powers, but it's incredibly scary. It has so much going on in terms of world building and has a very creepy, powerful intro at the very beginning. So all around, it's a very, very strong entry. And unfortunately, they kind of lost the intensity throughout the whole Thorn trilogy. I do like the Thorn trilogy, but I kind of wish they kept the tone of Part 4. But instead, it got a little bit too complicated for its own good. And at number one, of course, is the classic first Halloween. I know people just default to John Carpenter, and it's lazy to always pick the first one, but you got to go with the master because he established so much with so little. There are a few continuity errors, a few editing mistakes, but overall, this is a very strong entry. A lot of people fault the acting, and it is true, Loomis is probably the best character here, Michael still seems a little underdeveloped. Some of this is intentional, he's supposed to be mysterious, but at certain points, the acting is not as strong as it should be. This was a very rushed production. But for that very reason, it's pretty impressive just how much of it feels cohesive, feels well put together. And because it's really one of the first movies of its own kind, it's very extraordinary. It just establishes this very intense mood very early on and keeps it throughout the whole film. There are, of course, some mistakes you can nitpick now because we have the ability to go back to it so many times. But for its time period, and even to this day, it's a very impressive entry in the horror genre, as well as just a very key film in the Carpenter canon. And there we are with the top 5 Halloween films. What are your picks? Please comment below. Please like and subscribe. Thank you for listening.